In this video, I'm diving deep into a fascinating and pivotal moment in global geopolitics, the escalations and diplomatic maneuvering surrounding the 80th Victory Day celebrations in May 2025. As someone watching this conflict unfold from outside, I'm captivated by how the Ukraine-Russia war intersected with this symbolic milestone, revealing the intricate interplay of military strategy, symbolic gestures, and international alliances. This is going to be a comprehensive 20-minute speech covering Ukraine's bold counterattacks, the disruptions in Moscow, the foreign leaders who attended Russia's parade, and the crucial support from the US and UK for Ukraine. Let's unpack this step by step because there's a lot to explore here. Let's start with Ukraine's counterattacks and the symbolic timing behind them. In early May 2025, Russia was preparing to celebrate the 80th anniversary of victory in World War II. A major event for the Kremlin, steeped in historical pride and patriotic fervor. Victory Day on May 9th is a flagship holiday in Russia, a chance to showcase military might and national unity while commemorating the Soviet triumph over Nazi Germany. But just as Russia was gearing up for this big moment, Ukraine launched a series of counterattacks that seemed deliberately timed to disrupt the festivities. On the nights of May 4th to 5 and May 5th to 6, swarms of Ukrainian drones targeted Moscow itself, striking the capital for 2 consecutive nights. Russian authorities reported intercepting and destroying 19 drones on the second night alone, calling it a second-night attack in a row. The timing couldn't have been more pointed. These strikes happened right ahead of Moscow, marking the 80th anniversary of the victory over Nazi Germany, as Reuters noted. Ukrainian officials didn't publicly claim responsibility for these drone attacks, but the symbolism was unmistakable. By hitting Moscow during Victory Week, Ukraine was sending a clear message. Even as Russia celebrated its past military glory, it couldn't escape the reality of the ongoing war. These drone strikes weren't just about symbolism, though. They had tactical goals, too. By targeting Moscow's airspace on the eve of such a high-profile event, Ukraine forced Russia to divert precious air defense resources to protect the capital, potentially exposing vulnerabilities elsewhere along the front. Ukrainian sources hinted that these operations were meant to hit infrastructure tied to Russia's war effort, framing them as a response to Russia's continued assault on Ukraine. While the drones didn't cause major damage or casualties in Moscow, more on that in a moment, they did create significant disruption. Psychologically, the impact was huge. Imagine the scene, sirens blaring over Moscow, emergency measures kicking in, all while Russia wanted the world to focus on its triumphant parade. As one analyst put it, these Ukrainian operations showed that Russia was unable to guarantee security in the present conflict, even as it glorified its past victories. This blend of symbolic defiance and tactical pressure set the tone for a very tense May 2025. This wasn't Ukraine's only bold move around that time. Just days earlier, on April 28th, Russia announced it had successfully expelled Ukrainian forces from the Kursk region, a border area deep inside Russian territory. This was a significant moment because Ukraine had launched a rare cross-border incursion into Kursk months earlier, and Russia's pushback marked a battlefield win for the Kremlin. To capitalize on this success, President Vladimir Putin declared a unilateral 3-day ceasefire from May 8th to May 10th, framing it as a symbolic gesture to honor the boycotted anniversary. On the surface, it looked like a magnanimous move, a chance for Russia to project an image of goodwill during victory celebrations. But Ukraine wasn't impressed. President Volodymyr Zelensky dismissed the truce outright, calling it a theatrical performance. He argued that Russia had a history of using such brief pauses for propaganda purposes while continuing hostilities elsewhere, like during the Easter ceasefire in April 2025, which Russia violated within hours. Zelensky's skepticism wasn't unfounded. He pointed out that Russia often used these moments to regroup or reposition forces, not to genuinely de-escalate. Instead, Zelensky countered with his own proposal. He'd agree to an immediate, full, and unconditional ceasefire of at least 30 days, a plan backed by U.S. diplomats as a more meaningful step toward peace talks. This back and forth highlighted a core tension. Ukraine and its allies were pushing for a substantive halt to the violence, while Russia seemed more interested in symbolic gestures that played well for its domestic audience. Now, let's zoom in on the immediate fallout of Ukraine's drone campaign, the chaos it caused in Moscow, particularly with the airport shutdowns. On those 2 nights of May 4th to 5 and 5 to 6, the Ukrainian drone incursions led to unprecedented disruptions in Moscow's air traffic. All 4 major airports in the Moscow region, Vnukovo, Sheremetyevo, Domodedovo, and Zhukovsky, were forced to shut down temporarily as a precaution. Russian authorities halted flights for several hours each night to ensure air safety, while air defense units scrambled to intercept the incoming drones. Moscow's mayor Sergei Sobyanin confirmed that at least 19 drones were shot down on May 6th, noting they were approaching from different directions. While there were no reports of serious damage or injuries in the city itself, debris from the downed drones did cause some minor issues, like smashing windows in an apartment building along a major highway, according to posts on Russian Telegram channels. The nightly drone alarms put Muscovites on edge, and the government responded by tightening security measures across the capital. The disruptions didn't stop at Moscow. Regional airports in nearby oblasts like Kaluga, Penza, and Voronezh also imposed flight restrictions or brief closures during these incidents, reflecting widespread concern that the drone threat could extend beyond the capital. This was a big deal. Victory Day week is typically a time when Russia projects an image of total control, with everything running like clockwork. But here was Moscow, the heart of Russia, effectively scrambling as if under attack. The airport closures were a stark reminder of the war's reach, and they contrasted sharply with the Kremlin's carefully curated narrative of stability. Russian officials tried to downplay the impact, emphasizing that all drones were intercepted and that no attack reached Red Square, where the parade would be held. But the fact that Moscow's busy airports had to be paralyzed, a measure usually reserved for wartime emergencies, spoke volumes. It showed that Ukraine could bring the war to Russia's doorstep, even if just for a couple of nights. The timing of these disruptions amplified their impact. With Victory Day right around the corner, the Russian public and international observers saw the Kremlin grappling with active threats in real time. The consecutive attacks forced Russia into a reactive posture when it wanted to be focused on pageantry and celebration. It's worth noting that the ripple effects were felt beyond Moscow. Sevastopol in Russian-occupied Crimea actually canceled its Victory Day parade that year due to security concerns, likely fearing similar Ukrainian actions. Militarily, Ukraine achieved a measure of disruption and demonstrated the long reach of its drone capabilities deep into Russian territory. Psychologically, the sight of Moscow's airports grounded on the eve of May 9th was a propaganda setback for Russia. It punctured the aura of invincibility the Kremlin tries to project during Victory Day, showing that even its air defenses, while effective at intercepting drones, had to resort to drastic measures like closing the sky over the capital. Let's shift gears now to the diplomatic stage. Who attended Moscow's Victory Day parade, and what security concerns loomed over the event? Despite the tensions and disruptions, Russia went ahead with its May 9th parade in 2025, and several foreign dignitaries showed up, highlighting the day's diplomatic significance. The most prominent guest was Chinese President Xi Jinping, whom Putin invited as the parade's guest of honor. Xi's attendance was a big deal. It sent a strong signal of Sino-Russian unity at a time when both nations faced pressure from the West. Also in attendance was Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, reflecting Russia's efforts to strengthen ties with BRICS and Global South countries. Perhaps the most controversial attendee was Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico, an EU and NATO leader known for his pro-Moscow views. Fico's decision to attend went against the broader European stance. EU officials had urged member state leaders to boycott the Moscow event due to Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine. The presence of these leaders gave Putin a diplomatic win, allowing him to claim that Russia still had powerful allies despite international condemnation. But the lead-up to the parade was fraught with tension. On May 3rd, Zelensky issued an extraordinary public warning that made headlines. Kiev could not guarantee the safety of any foreign officials attending Victory Day in Moscow. He stated, "Our position is simple. We cannot be responsible for what happens on Russian territory," and suggested that Russia might stage provocations, like arson or bombings, to blame on Ukraine during the May 9th events. This was a bold and provocative statement, essentially cautioning leaders like Xi, Lula, and Fico that Moscow might not be a safe place to be, and that any incidents would be Russia's fault, not Ukraine's. Zelensky's warning caused a firestorm. Moscow accused him of making a direct threat against the Victory Day ceremonies. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev went further, calling it a verbal provocation and threatening that if anything happened on May 9th, Kyiv will not live to see May 10th. Fico, who was already on his way to Moscow, was equally incensed. He called Zelensky's statement a great disrespect, arguing that it was inappropriate to insinuate a drone might be dropped on the parade. Fico insisted that security was Russia's internal matter and told Zelensky to remain silent. This sharp rebuke from an EU leader underscored how divisive the issue was. Even within Europe, some voices aligned with Moscow's narrative. Despite the heated rhetoric, the Victory Day parade in Moscow went ahead without any major incidents. Red Square and central Moscow were under extremely tight security, blanketed with air defenses and extra troops to ensure nothing went wrong. The parade itself was scaled back compared to pre-war years, but it still featured the usual military displays, with Xi, Lula, and other dignitaries standing alongside Putin. The event provided the Kremlin with a valuable photo op projecting an image of international support. Chinese media, for instance, highlighted Xi's attendance as a sign of Beijing's continued diplomatic and economic support for Russia, despite Western pressure. Putin used the occasion to tout Russia's resilience and alliances, claiming the presence of these leaders proved he wasn't isolated. However, there were some wrinkles. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, a staunch Putin ally, attended but left early due to illness, sparking rumors about his health. Still, the headline was clear. Xi and Lula's presence gave Russia a diplomatic boost. On the flip side, Western countries made a point of boycotting the Moscow celebrations. Most EU leaders and the US sent no representatives, aligning with Zelensky's stance. In a symbolic countermove, Ukraine invited senior EU officials to Kiev on May 9th to mark Europe's boycotted victory, showing solidarity with Ukraine and drawing a stark contrast with Moscow's event. This dueling commemoration highlighted the deep geopolitical divide. The leaders who attended Moscow, Xi, Lula, Fico, signaled that Russia could still draw major figures to its stage, but the absence of Western representatives underscored its isolation from that sphere. The event became a microcosm of the broader diplomatic struggle. Who showed up and who pointedly stayed away was as significant as the tanks and missiles rolling through Red Square. Now, let's turn to the roles of the US and UK in supporting Ukraine during this period, because their involvement was absolutely critical. Both nations have been major backers of Kyiv since the war began, but their approaches in early 2025 showed some interesting differences. Let's start with the United States. By 2025, the US had been Ukraine's largest military aid provider, with Congress authorizing a staggering $175 billion in total aid since 2022, covering military, economic, and humanitarian support. This included advanced weapons like HIMARS rocket systems, Patriot air defenses, and Abrams tanks, which have been crucial for Ukraine's defense. But the return of President Donald Trump to the White House in 2025 brought a shift in tone. In early March, the U.S. temporarily froze all military aid and sensitive intelligence sharing with Ukraine, a move that sent shockwaves through Kyiv. This freeze came after a contentious Oval Office meeting on February 28th between Trump and Zelensky, which reportedly turned acrimonious. White House sources said the pause was meant as leverage. Trump wanted to pressure Ukraine into peace talks with Russia, and he signaled that aid would resume only if Kyiv showed seriousness about negotiations. For about a week, This freeze left Ukraine in a precarious spot. Critical U.S. battlefield intelligence, like satellite data on Russian missile launches and bomber movements, was withheld, leaving Ukrainian officials worried they were in the dark. One official noted that losing this intel would severely hamper their ability to conduct long-range drone strikes inside Russia. But the pause didn't last long. Facing pushback from Ukraine and domestic critics, Trump reversed course after Zelensky made a key concession. By mid-March, Zelensky agreed to an unconditional 30-day ceasefire, contingent on Russian reciprocity, as a gesture toward peace talks. Although Russia didn't accept the ceasefire, Zelensky's agreement was enough for Washington. The U.S. lifted the aid freeze shortly after, following talks in Saudi Arabia aimed at restarting negotiations. From there, the U.S. worked to mend ties with Kyiv. A major milestone came on April 30th when the U.S. and Ukraine signed a landmark minerals agreement. This deal established a joint investment fund for Ukrainian mineral resources and reconstruction, giving the U.S. preferential access to new projects and a share in future profits. Trump framed it as a win-win, an economic backstop for Ukraine that also tied the two nations closer together. U.S. Treasury officials said it sent a strong signal to Russia that there was no daylight between America and Ukraine. Geopolitically, the deal strengthened Trump's hand, showing Moscow that the U.S. wasn't abandoning Kyiv even as it pushed for talks. Militarily, the U.S. continued to play a vital role. After the brief March interruption, intelligence sharing resumed. Battlefield data, targeting info, and early warnings of Russian attacks flowed back to Kyiv. The U.S. didn't have combat troops in Ukraine, but leaked Pentagon documents from 2023 revealed about 14 U.S. Special Forces personnel were on the ground, likely for training and advisory roles. The U.S. also kept facilitating weapons deliveries, executing previously approved aid packages that brought in advanced systems. By May 2025, the U.S. had reaffirmed its commitment, standing shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine, though Trump's emphasis on a negotiated settlement meant support now came with expectations that Kyiv cooperate in peace efforts. The United Kingdom, on the other hand, took a more consistent and unwavering approach under Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who took office in late 2024. The UK has been the second largest donor of military aid to Ukraine, pledging $7.8 billion, about $10 billion by 2025, including a fresh $3 billion for 2024-25. This aid included high-end equipment. The UK was the first to send Western battle tanks, Challenger 2s in 2023, and provided long-range Storm Shadow missiles by 2024, giving Ukraine new strike capabilities. The UK also supplied air defenses, anti-tank weapons like NLAWs and artillery. Beyond hardware, Britain's training efforts were massive. Through Operation Interflex, the UK trained over 50,000 Ukrainian soldiers by 2025, teaching tactics, marksmanship, and leadership to bolster Ukraine's forces. Covertly, the UK went further than most allies. Leaked documents showed about 50 British Special Forces operators were in Ukraine in 2023, the highest number among Western nations. These elite units, likely from the SAS or SBS, assisted with training, recon, and securing diplomatic convoys, though the UK Ministry of Defense never officially confirmed this. Intelligence-wise, the UK was a lifeline for Ukraine. Britain's GCHQ and MI6 shared critical data on Russian movements, and RAF surveillance planes patrolled NATO's eastern flank to intercept Russian communications. Crucially, during the U.S. intelligence pause in March, the UK continued sharing intel as before, ensuring Ukraine wasn't completely blind. A UK spokesperson emphasized that Britain's commitment was unwavering, and in practice, this meant Ukrainian forces still had access to some Western intelligence feeds during that tense period. Diplomatically, Starmer took a hard line against Putin. In March 2025, as peace talk rumors grew, he convened military officials from 31 countries in London to plan a coalition of the willing to support Ukraine's long-term security. The UK even explored deploying British troops in a peacekeeping role if a fair ceasefire was reached, a bold stance compared to the US's more cautious approach. Starmer warned Putin that any breach of a potential peace deal would have severe consequences, signaling Britain's readiness to back Ukraine even in a post-war scenario. Unlike the US, the UK refused to pressure Kyiv into an unfavorable peace, focusing instead on strengthening Ukraine's military position to ensure a just outcome. Let's tie this all together. The 80th Victory Day in May 2025 was a flashpoint that encapsulated the Ukraine-Russia conflict's complexity. Ukraine's drone attacks on Moscow, timed to coincide with Russia's celebrations, were a masterstroke of symbolic and tactical pressure, showing that Russia couldn't escape the war even during its proudest moment. The airport shutdowns in Moscow, shutting down all 4 major airports for hours, highlighted the war's reach, disrupting the Kremlin's carefully curated image of control. The Victory Day parade went ahead, with leaders like Xi Jinping, Lula, and Robert Fico attending, giving Putin a diplomatic win. But Zelensky's security warnings and the Western boycott underscored the global divide. The US and UK, despite their different approaches, remained Ukraine's backbone. The US, after a rocky march, reaffirmed its support with a minerals deal, while the UK provided unwavering military, intelligence, and diplomatic backing. This period showed how every move, whether a drone strike, a parade guest, or a ceasefire proposal, carried layers of meaning in this ongoing struggle.